coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. This week, we're going to be digging, pun a little intended, into one of Lorelai's more controversial boyfriends. We talked about him during the Battle of the Boyfriends, but we think he merits a fuller discussion. So we gave him his own whole episode. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Jason P. Digger Stiles.
Woo, woo, woo. But before we get into talking about Jason, if you could please do those YouTube-y things for us, please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's one click and it really does help us out, and we're always just really grateful for that support. Let's dive right into our synopses.
Let's do it. We're up to season 4, episode 12, A Family Matter. A strange woman arrives at the diner to talk to Luke, who turns out to be his sister Liz. She's in town for her 20-year high school reunion and wants to tell her beloved big brother about how her life is going so much better now and how she has another new boyfriend. Jason comes to visit Lorelai in Stars Hollow for the first time, and they go furniture shopping for his office, but their afternoon is interrupted by Emily calling them both, asking them to come to a charity event, which threatens to expose their relationship. Jason wants Lorelai to finally tell her parents about them, and even though she resists initially, she does decide to tell her mother at Friday night dinner. But just as she's about to tell Emily, a snarky remark about Jason from her changes her mind. Jess returns to town after Liz calls him and tells him that Luke has his car, and Rory accidentally sees him sleeping in it. Jamie visits Paris for his birthday, but her obsession with her affair with Asher Fleming causes her to blow him off and eventually break up with him after Rory tells her to stop stringing him along.
Sage advice. This is followed up by episode 13, Nag Hammadi's, where they found the Gnostic Gospels. And Jess is stuck in town while he's waiting for his car to be fixed, so he spends the day trying to dodge Rory. When Luke meets Liz's new boyfriend, he talks to Jess about what they can do to get rid of the guy, and Jess goes off on Luke about how he tries to fix everyone and how always trying to be the martyr doesn't make him a good guy, just a pain in the ass. Luke is upset and has a couple beers and goes over to Lorelai's house to fix her broken window and ends up cutting himself. He tells Lorelai what Jess said to him, and when she finally gets it out some proper first aid supplies for him and spots Jess, she finally lets him have it over how he treated Luke. Lorelai and Jason continue to hide their relationship from Emily and Richard at the rare manuscript acquisition fundraiser, and Floyd Stiles makes an icy appearance. At the Firelight Festival, Luke tells Liz he's happy for her and her new relationship, and Jess chases down Rory to tell her that he loves her.
I did not skip Obscure Manuscript Humor 101.
You did not.
I did not. So I love that episode.
Yes.
I also love how Lorelai's like, who would have thought that, I would look at my mother and think warm.
Well, when you have Floyd as the comparative aspect in that equation. Yeah.
He does comparatively make her look better.
We'll talk about it.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have always kind of been on the I love Jason for Lorelai train. And so I'm really excited to talk about him a little bit more because I think he's a little bit like crapped on by the fandom at times. And I think it might be a little overstated or oversold how terrible he is, and I want to kind of like dig, as I punned earlier, into him a little bit more and kind of tease out more of his personality and his relationship with Lorelai and his interactions with Emily and Richard as well. Yeah. So let me ask you, what were your first impressions of Jason when he first came on the scene, propositioning Richard to go into business together?
I actually liked him as an individual, whether we're talking as whether he's a good partner for Rory, that's a separate answer. But he seemed to have a very good head on his shoulders. He was very business savvy. He came to Richard with not a healthy proposition, not a mediocre one where it's like, I'm just, winging it here. Like, he had a well thought out business plan. He was coming in with clients that were already acquired, a good formula for how he wanted that new company to succeed. And he outlined everything for Richard in a way that was very clear and concise, where if I was Richard Gilmore, I know, you're hesitant because you've previously been in business with, your dad and other enemies, so to say. But he came in, I think, just knowing what he wanted out of that business partnership. And so I thought, this is someone where I'm just intrigued to want to know more about him because he just seems like a really intelligent, business savvy person who's going to be successful in life in one way or another.
Yeah, I don't even remember what my initial reaction to him was when I first watched the show, but I know that as I rewatched and started thinking about him more, seriously and analytically as a partner for Lorelai, the more I was like, holy moly, he is like male Lorelai when you really think about it. You know, they both have fathers who are in the insurance business in Hartford and corporate mothers. You know, they both probably went to fancy private schools. They even went to camp together when they were younger. They have very similar senses of humor. They're both very like particular about their things and their spaces, but just on completely different ends of the spectrum. You know, he's very like clean and orderly and wants all of his things to serve a purpose. And Lorelai wants to surround herself with things that make her happy and feel whimsical. And you know, so they're very different on how they do it, but they're both similarly kind of like looking to curate their spaces in a particular kind of way that bear some resemblance. And so I find it interesting just how much they have in common. And I think that's what makes them so much fun to watch together. That chemistry was really there between them, I thought. And I just was really intrigued. I thought like he had his moments where I was like, ooh, like the hooker in the bed comment about Atlantic City. Like I didn't love that. But other than that, he was actually really good to Lorelai. He was very honest. He was upfront. He was mature. He was communicative. He was the one who was trying to push her to get Emily and Richard on board. So for the most part, I really like Jason.
Do you think that I have two questions I want to ask first. I'll say this. Is he a better partner for Lorelai than Christopher?
He's more mature, and he was just sort of more with it in his 30s than Christopher was. And so in a way, yes, I think he was more invested in the actual relationship. I think Christopher was invested in the idea of him and Lorelai together and Lorelai kind of being it for him. Whereas Jason had a much more grounded and realistic view on their relationship and was actually there making it work day in, day out. And like, I think to the moment in Raincoats and Recipes where Jason shows up and he's like, I just refuse to let go of the things that mean that much to me. Whereas, you know, Christopher, like when Richard has his heart attack, he's nowhere to be found. Jason was kind of like always there. He was always in touch. He was always there for Lorelai when she needed him. And Christopher was flakier. And so I think in a way, Christopher was better because I think, you know, he did make it to the final round of our
Yes, he did.
Of our Battle of the Boyfriends for a reason. And I think that was because they did have that history and they did have Rory and the family aspect. And, you know, I would hope that Christopher could work through those things and be a good partner for Lorelai. But in some ways, I do think Jason was better. It was a really close call for me to put Chris over Jason. And it really came down to the family dynamic with Rory involved. Jason and Rory seemed to get on okay, but she was off at Yale, so he didn't need to be as involved in her life. Whereas Lorelai getting with Christopher, it sort of felt like a completion of something, and it felt like a necessary step for both of them to figure something out. Obviously, I didn't think she was going to end up with Jason long run, and so that's why I think Christopher needed to happen more, and I think maybe that's why I put him above Jason for the Battle of the Boyfriends, because it felt like okay, got to check this off and really give it a good go before we can completely move on with our lives.
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that because I want to just remove Rory from the equation and let's just pretend that she doesn't exist. Christopher and Jason had probably not identical, but very similar upbringings in terms of social status, class, where they probably went to school, how they were raised by their parents, the code of conduct they were brought up by. And I think a lot of people would still say, and perhaps you might even make that argument that had Rory not been in the picture, Jason's the better and more just inline partner for her in terms of basic chemistry even. So in terms of a similar upbringing, but then having two very different results within these men, where does Christopher deviate from Jason on that path?
Oh, yeah. It's a good point. If Rory's not a factor, I just think Jason's a better person. Like, if I had to pick between them, there's more potential in Jason. He's got a few rough edges because I think he was just a bachelor for a little too long. And Christopher had a little bit of the same Arrested Development that Lorelai did. I think running away from the expectations, both that his parents had for him and that the world had for him as a father, may have stunted him in ways that Jason didn't have to deal with. And so I think that's, I mean, again, the hypothetical of Rory not existing kind of like, it's so hard because, like I said, it shaped so much of Christopher's 20s and 30s in a way that Jason never had to contend with. And so I think Jason overall is a better person. And Lorelai probably would have been better off with him than Christopher, but it was not to be.
Yeah. I will also give Jason credit for that. I think Christopher, whether he would ever want to own up to it or not, was just lazy at times. And I feel like Jason wasn't. Jason, even when he was failing in business and when people were stabbing him in the back, we'll get to it, he continued to like work and grind it out and pursue what he wanted, where I feel like Christopher sometimes would let himself get so deflated by failure and let it stunt him that he couldn't then move forward. And Jason was always just very good about acknowledging his failures and continuing to say, I'm going to continue to work harder and push through this, whereas Christopher failed. And I feel like for Lorelai, I think she appreciated that more in Jason, whereas with Christopher, and maybe this is because Lorelai also is a business person who is, you know, having to work through a lot of those challenges herself, she knows you can't give up when you're, you know, going over speed bumps like that. And Jason, you know, just continues to cross that threshold and work through it, whereas Christopher just kind of rested on his laurels and then just fell back on them and gave up too quickly. I think there's a difference there too with how Lorelai viewed them. But what do you think about how maybe even the fact that the two of them are now, you know, adults in the business world trying to like make it on their own within their own business and spearhead their own thing, with Lorelai with the inn, with Jason with his own company? Do you think that led them to have even better chemistry or a better chance for success?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I think the fact that they both had similar levels of ambition and drive and work ethic helped. Jason was much stronger on that front. He went to Harvard, you know, he made it through Harvard, and that on its own is a huge accomplishment. And he's probably been working in the insurance business with his father for 15 years. He has this whole track record of success. And I mean, granted, there's some nepotism involved, but Jason's worked his butt off to prove himself. And he came to Richard in the first place to forge his own path and do his own thing, which takes, you know, some cojones to like to branch out from daddy and go work for his direct competitor and burn some bridges in the process. So yeah, I think she appreciated his ambition and his commitment to it. I think she, especially because he was in business with her father, I think she liked kind of seeing that from him. I like when they're both on the phone and they're talking over each other, and it's like the all business power couple, or like, you know, the all business couple powered by Marriott. You know, like I like that. And it did go to show that like they were two independent, strong, smart, driven individuals who had their own lives, who also happened to really love spending time together, and who had a great amount of chemistry and attraction to each other. And even though Jason has like wild insomnia and can't sleep in the same bed as anyone else, which I kind of get, frankly, you know, like it almost seems like a good arrangement for them, because Lorelai is so independent that like maybe she's happy to not be attached at the hip to someone all the time, and that they can sort of have their own spaces while still being together. You know, not every relationship has to look like that mom and dad nuclear unit, sleeping in the same bed. People should be able to kind of make their own rules in their relationships. And if that setup works for them and it's how they're happiest and most peaceful, I say more power to them. And I like that was displayed. And I think, you know, it may have become an issue in the long run. I don't know. But the fact that they broke up for external circumstances piques my interest there, because who knows, maybe it would have helped their relationship last longer from doing that, and from having their own things and doing their own stuff, having their own spaces.
I mean, I agree. And I think it's a healthy part of any relationship to have that individuality and that time to yourself to explore your own passion projects, your own hobbies, to not be glued at the hip, so to say. And not just Lorelai with Jason, but I think that's who Lorelai is on the whole. She's very much a person that just needs a boyfriend or a partner or a husband who's just going to be like, I love you and I care for you and I'm always here for you. But I know that a lot of times you just want to do your own thing and you do need your own time and your own space. And someone who's going to give Lorelai that. And Jason was always very good about that. Again, I don't mean to like bag on Chris too much, but I feel like Chris was definitely, you know, a person who was just like, but I love you and I just want to glom onto you and like, you know, spend all my time with you. And I could see how Lorelai would very much be like, no. Yeah. And so I think Jason was good in that regard with that space.
Yeah. I'm going to move into your house and I'm going to convert Rory's room into Gigi's room and I'm going to try to convince you to buy another house outside of town. You know, like you could see that Lorelai was chafing at the idea of a merged life, even with Christopher, this person she's known for 30 years and has a child with already and is like co-parenting his daughter. And yet she's like, no, we're just going to stay in my cramped little house. And so I feel like, you know, had she and Jason continued on, maybe they keep their own apartments. Like Jason is wealthy enough that he can, you know, maintain his own residence and she can keep her house and they can alternate their time so that neither of them gets too sick of the other, if that makes sense. And, you know, he's traveling a lot. So she kind of gets to do her own thing and spend her time with Rory in that way. So I think it was a really cool and interesting dynamic. I think it's part of what makes things work with Luke as well, is that he was willing to incorporate into her life, but not in such a way. And I think he always had that sort of pressure valve of the apartment above the diner as well. So like he had like a little space he could escape to, or thing, you know, maybe store all of his fishing equipment so that it doesn't clutter her garage. You know what I mean? Like, I think they had a similar vibe, and that's why we see issues when he tries to buy the Twickham house. So, yeah.
And we'll talk about why that relationship failed and those external factors and what could have happened and maybe what we would have liked to have seen. But I want to backtrack us a little bit now to the first date between Jason and Lorelai. And let's talk about how it started. You know, we'll get to how it's going. Spoiler alert, it ends.
It ain't going.
It ain't going anymore. We'll get there. But talk to me about that first date. What did you think of how Jason went about that first date on the whole? You know, break down for us, in case anybody here watching doesn't know what happened. If you think it was a good choice, a bad choice, why or why not? Let's talk about it.
Right. If you haven't seen the episode and don't know what's happening, I implore you to pause and go watch it because it's one of my favorites of the whole series. But in case you decided to continue listening, I will give you a rundown anyway. It's the day of the tailgating at Yale, the Harvard-Yale game, and Richard and Emily are fighting. Emily kind of takes it out on Lorelai. Lorelai decides to use this opportunity to finally say yes to all of Jason's persistent attempts to get her to go out with him. And so he had kind of previously called her and said, look, I've got reservations at China Garden for 8:30. Like, will you join me? And she's like, I'm really tempted, but I shouldn't. But then this fight with Emily sort of changes her mind and she goes anyway. And so it's clear that Jason put a lot of thought into this. So China Garden at the time was a very like hip, hot restaurant, hard to get reservations. So, you know, the fact that he sort of like kind of bent over backwards and in advance planned for like a very cool spot, very fancy, probably very pricey. And he booked a private room for them because he wanted to be able to just focus on the date. He's like, you know, you can't hear yourself think with all of the noise of all of those people. So like I wanted, you know, to get away from that a little bit. And she looks at him like he has three heads. And I'm like, oh, come on, Lorelai. Like, even there was a moment where a waiter came in to fill their water glasses and she like cranes to look out the door and like see what's happening outside. And I'm like, okay, can you just like get out of Lorelai land for like an hour and just focus on your date? It doesn't matter what's happening out there. Your date is happening in here. And so she's sort of like, you booked this on purpose. Like, why did you do this? And she's like, it's weird. And he's like, the whole point is to enjoy the food and the atmosphere. And she's like, but all the atmosphere is out there. But also so is the noise and the hoopla. Stop trying to spy on Ted Koppel and pay attention to your date.
Yeah.
And, just sit here and get to know him. Go to a bump-in restaurant or come back in the future once you've gotten to know each other better. He's already clearly put time and thought into this, and he was trying to be thoughtful and considerate here, trying to go to a place that you would like. Even in Die Jerk, they talk about, he asked Emily for restaurant recommendations. And he says something about Thai food, and Emily's like, I despise Thai food. And Lorelai's like, me too. Chinese is good, though. And so the fact that he gets China Garden reservations, he did this on purpose. He had this all planned out and thought out, and I thought it was sweet, and I thought Lorelai was just being a little juvenile and but I want to be out there with all the people. Grow up, you're in your 30s.
Okay, Ariel.
It's a first date. Just pay attention, get to know the guy, and do something else later.
Yeah. I think by the end of the first date, Lorelai is happy that she actually went on it, and she does make an effort to have that one-on-one time with Jason that they should have had at China Garden. But I think my theory is that I think she just went into the date not even wanting a first date with Jason. I think she was just having such a blah day, and she was so frustrated by everything that had happened at the football game, the fact that Rory was still there, that she probably didn't want to come home so early in the night to an empty house with no one to vent to, nothing to do, that she was probably this is just something to do right now to take my mind off of the kind of crappy day that I've had. And so I think she went into that first date, not necessarily be I would like to get to know Jason better and get to know this man better. And we get there with her. But I think she went into it kind of just also needing an out to just a sour day for her, and just being I kind of just need a distraction right now.
You are so right. I didn't even think about that, because it's clear that there's some banter going on between the two, but she's so resistant to the idea. She's like, you're in business with my father, you're hated by my mother, you're from my world. And so she's a little bit lukewarm on the idea. And you're right. I think she did this as a reactionary response to her crappy day and to her mom being mad at her. She's like, I'm going to do something to piss off Emily now. And so you're right. I don't think she was so much interested in actually the date with Jason as she was just being at a swanky restaurant where Ted Koppel is 10 feet away. And that doesn't say much for Lorelai. It's not a good look.
No. But
they end up having a great time. I mean, the first bit's rough. And then we have the middle bit where she tells him to pull off the interstate to go get tacos. And then he's like, I'm not really a big fan of Mexican food. And I'm like, I feel you there, my friend. I don't always love tacos. Why do people have to put cilantro in everything? So, I don't always love Mexican food myself. And the fact that she's like, we're going here, we're getting tacos, we're going to eat in your car. Again, Lorelai just being like, we're going to do what I want.
Yeah, it's not the first time, I think, even with food and dinner and being out on dates with guys, that she's made executive decisions on wherever they're going to eat. I feel like we even see her do it with Max when he shows up in Stars Hollow, and they're just going to the window to grab some burgers and some Cokes. But I feel like she's very much the person that, especially in terms of food and with her relationship with food, it's we're going to eat what I want to eat.
Because I obviously have the best taste, and you're going to love my recommendation.
Yeah. So I think when they go through this taco drive-through window, I think she was expecting Jason to just be like, yeah, this is great. I'll take 3 burritos, a large Coke, maybe some queso and nachos, or, and let's go. And so I think when he's like, this is not for me, that's not a Lorelai response that she's used to. So I think she's just like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to eat then either. And then it just becomes this really weird, awkward moment of I know you both are hungry. You both are starving because you've both admitted it. So there's got to be something else that happens now, which then leads them to having this, what I think ends up being a very unique, kind of odd, it's not something that happens often with most people, but still a relatively, ends well date at the supermarket.
Yeah, it's kind of a bizarro thing. But I think that's kind of why they work so well, is they have these initial hurdles and things aren't going very well, but they turn it around and they can just sort of like let the walls down a little bit and be like, okay, you know what? We are going to run some errands and we're going to be silly and we're going to make this work. And then they end up having a great time. And she says to Rory later, like, you know, I love that he's, what's the word she uses? I can't remember the exact word, but you know, he's kind of off kilter, you know, he's different and he keeps her on her toes and they can be kind of weird together and she likes that. And this is sort of the first instance of it. I think, you know, he's kind of trying to put on the facade of like, oh, this is the first date. We're going to be on our best behavior. We're going to like do the whole thing upright and we're going to try to impress her. But, you know, she doesn't need that. She doesn't want it. She wants fun. She wants whimsy. She wants spontaneity. And that's what that was for them. But my issue with it is how they go into the back and they cut that entire palette of Cap'n Crunch and punch in as Lucy and or Jamal. Like, Lorelai's all sort of like up in Logan's grill about his pranks and his sort of like lack of respect for people and whatnot. And yet here she is sort of like possibly screwing up the employment of like people who are like service workers who are lower class than she is.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that I was either also a fan of. It felt very privileged for even Chris to like, you know, just kind of throw money at a problem and be like, hey, let us in the stock room. I know you got all the good snacks back there. I was not a fan of it. And then I don't like what happened after that. But again, I thought the date on the whole went well. And so I'm glad that it allowed them to, you know, then say, oh, well, this is actually maybe on Lorelai, especially on Lorelai's point, maybe I do want to pursue this. And maybe I want to pursue it for more than, again, just the reason of it's going to piss off Emily and Richard.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fine that Jason kind of flexed his charisma muscles and was able to talk the guy into like letting them in the back just to see if something was there. And that was fine. But it was Lorelai being like, I'm going to play with the punch clock and here, take the knife and cut open the Cap'n Crunch. Like, I don't think he meant for it to go everywhere, but it did. And they obviously just left it like that. So someone else who makes minimum wage has to clean that up. And then like, who knows what they did with the time card thing. I'm like, and then there's the time she's like, would gluing everything to the ceiling in the exact same position, but upside down, be going too far? And I'm like, she's more like Logan than she likes to admit. Whereas, you know, Jason, all he wanted to do was find her Pringles. And I think that's sweet. He's just like, she wants the little cans of sour cream and onion Pringles. That's what she's going to get tonight. And, you know, he kind of always goes above and beyond for her. So it was a good start that he was like, he jumps into action. He makes it happen. Boom. They end up having a great date, like you said. And then we have the next stage in their relationship, which moves us on to their first night together in his apartment.
Indeed. Which I think it was very telling because you start to see how, first off, even from like a cleanliness perspective, these people have very different habits and very different levels of what they think is acceptable. Jason is very meticulous. He's very clean. He's very organized. His space is set up in a way that I feel like he knows exactly where everything is. There's never going to be a time where he's not going to. And Lorelai, you know, within her own house could just be like, I don't know, where's the pot and pan? Like, I need a knife. Can like help me?
They're at the neighbor's house or Luke's, you know, like, I just remember, was it the second episode when Lorelai comes home and she has to like dig under a pile of laundry to find the phone.
Yep.
When she's got all of her dry cleaning in her arms. Yeah. She's very much into the like maximalist cottage core cozy house. And he's got this uber modern apartment. It was clearly done by a decorator, especially that spare bedroom, which we'll get to in a second. Like, you know, Jason's not that glam, but you know, he's very well appointed. He's mature. His sense of style is very sophisticated. And so it's, again, they're very different in that way. And it's kind of weird to even see Lorelai in that kind of environment. I wonder if that was sort of a visual cue to us as the audience. Like, these two are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and therefore it's not going to last. Because Luke's is small and warm and sentimental as well. And so I wonder if it was just sort of, we'll get to, or no, we already talked about this. So yeah, this will come up in our interior design episode. Yeah. So check that out from a couple weeks ago. But I just think it's a visual thing for us to get a bit of a clue that while they get along really well and do have a lot of stuff in common, at the end of the day, they're very different. But talk to me about the request Jason makes of Lorelai, kind of after they're done with their nookie. He asks her to sleep in the spare room. What's your take on that?
I'm okay with it. I really don't foresee any glaring red flag for me there or anything that I think, I would necessarily say like, ooh, deal breaker or call you out on. Like, first off, this is still a very new relationship for them. They're going to have to figure out each other's comfort levels, how each other lives, how they operate. We've said it before, but for Jason to just be the individual where it's like, it's not that I don't care about you, but like I have a need for personal space and I need to be able to like sleep in my own bed so that I can get as much quality rest as I can. And for him to say, to Lorelai, oh, can you go sleep in the other room? I think it might have come across a little too bluntly because he didn't follow up on an explanation like as well as he should have as to why he was asking Lorelai to do that. He just said, oh, please go do it. But like, I'm not breaking it down for you why I actually need this. And so I feel like for Lorelai, that lack of communication probably led to some gray areas of her just being like, well, was he just trying to get some and now he wants me to go away? What is happening here? I think that would be a normal and common thought for anyone in that situation to have, and that can really knock you down a couple pegs. But on the whole, I think Jason should have communicated better why he was making that request. But I think it's not an unreasonable one. That's just his level of comfort and how he needs to be able to exist within his own home. But do you have a similar opinion or a different take on it?
Yeah, as someone who also at times struggles with pretty bad insomnia and like I'm a late chronotype. I don't like getting up early. So anytime Dan tries to wake me up before I'm ready, I'm like cranky AF. So I get it. Sleep is super important. And if you really like can't sleep when someone else is around, I get that. But you're right. I think maybe he should have led with, look, I have chronic insomnia and any distraction or anything in my room really impedes my ability to sleep through the night. And so I really want you to be here in the morning, like to lead with the things that he eventually ends up saying after he's trying to like convince her to stay. Like, I want to see you in the morning. I want to make you breakfast. I want you to be here when I wake up. But I need you to sleep in the other room so that we can both get like good nights of sleep. And like, it'll be very comfortable. You've got your own bathroom. There's Kiehl's products. So yeah, you're right. He should have couched it a little differently. It was a strange request up front, but obviously Lorelai thinks it's just a line at first, trying to like gently get her to go home. But his insists it's like, no, I really want you to be here, really kind of takes the sting out of it for everyone. And, I think we need to be a little more accepting that like everyone does have their own things, their own needs, their own boundaries that need to be accommodated for in relationships. It's not necessarily something you see depicted or talked about all the time, but it's really true. And, the communication of it can get sticky, but I think he did as good a job as he could under the circumstances. And that it makes me wonder, like, how often does he do this?
Yeah.
Because obviously he's got this other room and it's clearly done by a decorator. And it's like, is this done for the benefit of the ladies? And exactly how many ladies? But the fact that he hasn't really like perfected the pitch yet makes me wonder if like he's kind of been, just waiting for the right girl for a while. I don't know. Either that or he really does just ask them to go home.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next thought. Maybe he either just immediately does say, like, you can go now because I'm sensing that this is not going to work out. Or maybe he does make that request of other women in the past, and they do take it the wrong way because maybe, again, on his part, there is no appropriate communicative follow-up as to why that request is being made. And so these women just knee-jerk and they're like, okay, well, I guess I'll leave if you really don't want me here. And maybe they do just take off without waiting for an explanation. Or maybe it's like you said, maybe Lorelai was finally a woman, if not the first, perhaps maybe like, the first woman in a while that he was actually like, I don't want her to go right away. And I think we see that too. And I want to talk about other things too, but I think he recognizes that down the line when he's like, he has that moment with talking with her where he's like, normally this is the time in the relationship where like, I'm ready to bolt and I'm ready to just call it quits and say like, we're done here. And he's like, I don't feel that way. And I actually don't want this to end. And then he, goes into making a request that he makes and the whole key thing. But like, talk to me about that.
Mm-hmm. I love that moment, He tries to give her the key and it's kind of awkward and she sort of reads it as a practicality, like, because that's kind of how he pitches it, I guess. He's like, well, if you want to get in and I'm not here, just in case. He tries to not make a big deal about it, even though it's a pretty big step in terms of levels of trust and intimacy. To give someone a key to your place for them to be there when you're not, that's something special. And so she's just sort of like, all right, I'll take the key. And then he sort of ruminates on it a little bit. It's like, I did this wrong. And yeah, this is the time in the relationship when I would normally bolt. And so I went through everything in my head that bugs me about us, and I came up with nothing. And so, again, this is why I like Jason, because he really is invested and committed in this relationship with Lorelai. Like I said, he has a few minutes of immaturity here and there with again, it was 2003, so there's at least one homophobic joke. There's some, again, inappropriate uses of terminology for sex workers. We didn't really have the vocabulary back then, and it was just sort of, more common to refer to them as other things. And other than that, I feel like he's very sweet to Lorelai, and he's really letting her in a way that it seems like he doesn't do very often.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the first boyfriends that we kind of see her going out and about with in Stars Hollow. It took her a while to do that with Max. I guess we had their first date where he was stranded. Mm-hmm. So that almost feels like it doesn't count. It does, but it doesn't. And then Alex picks her up at her house once or twice that we see. But this is the first time sort of like, I'm going to come to Stars Hollow and we're going to go shopping and we're going to go for coffee. We're going to do this. And she doesn't seem used to that.
Yeah. Do you think the whole, I think there's something to be said for what a key represents to Lorelai, because it's almost a direct black and white with what happened with her and Max, where Jason is like, I'd like you to have a key so you can come and go at your leisure because I want you to feel comfortable in my space, even when I'm not here. I trust you in that regard. Mm-hmm. And so I flash back to thinking of Max and Lorelai having that same issue of wanting a key and to be able to enter into her space when she wasn't around. And she kind of is just deer in the headlights, whoa, hang on. I don't know if we're there. I don't think we're there.
We're engaged, but no, you can't have a key in the house. Sorry.
So it seems like in that regard, I don't know if maybe it was a lack of trust, or maybe just this is mine and this is Rory's and I'm still not ready for you to just exist here freely. But it just seems like that whole issue of having a key and a means and an opportunity to be a part of someone else's life in such a significant way in that regard really always throws Lorelai for a loop.
That's an excellent, brilliant connection. It's so true that it's a inverse parallel to her not even thinking about Max's need for a key. So yeah, the fact that someone is reaching out to her saying, I love you and I trust you enough to have you in my space and I want you here more, versus her, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, this is mine and this is Rory's. And so to give someone else a key would be acknowledging that entire dynamic is now upended and is completely different. And we see that when Lorelai goes to Rory in bed and is just like, it's weird, there's a man in the house.
Yeah.
She was still not comfortable with that idea. But by the time she's dating Jason, Rory is off at Yale. Mm-hmm. And so she can finally start to live her life. And they spend most nights at his house because she doesn't really have like a secondary accommodation so they can both get their sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a whole different dynamic now for her. She doesn't have to worry so much about that. And so, and it's also different, I think, accepting one from someone else and giving someone one of yours. And Lorelai was always so guarded in that way with everyone, except maybe Luke. But then again, Luke also knows how to break into the back door pretty well. So that kind of feels like a different story. But she, you know, she walks in to find he's broken into her house and she's like, yeah, okay, sure. Like, I trust you to be here. Like, you're just going to fix my garbage disposal. So break in all you want, buddy.
Yeah, I think any man who is doing household repairs for Lorelai,
just carte blanche.
Come in. Let's anytime. Throw out that welcome mat. That's a horse of a different color.
Yeah, excellent reference. I like that. Yeah, so one more thing about Lorelai's relationship I want to ask about, and then I feel like we should move on to the Richard and Emily of it all. So in The Nanny and the Professor, Lorelai's at dinner with her parents, and they hear that Jason had been to a fibromyalgia fundraiser the night before with Crystal. And Jason didn't tell her about it. She got a little defensive. Do you think Jason was, well within his rights to do that? And like, how do you feel about the fact that Lorelai kind of got cold cocked with it over dinner? Like, what's your take on that? Because I know I have some feelings.
Yep. A similar response to the whole please leave my bed and go sleep in your own room sort of thing. An instance where Jason should have communicated better with Lorelai that I am having this fundraiser, this benefit dinner, this, work-related, business-related thing that I have to attend. I will be bringing this person with me in a non-romantic way, just as like a co-worker capacity sort of. I want to let you know about it so that you're not uncomfortable. And if that's the only thing that was ever said, I think Lorelai would have just been like, yeah, okay, we're cool, we're good. Thank you for telling me. I think it was because she had to find out in the way that she did, and she was just like, oh, why didn't he make an effort to just communicate that to me himself, even if he would have later on at some point or soon enough. I think it was just her being flummoxed about why couldn't he just tell me that? I would have been okay with it. And I can certainly understand and appreciate her response in that regard. I do think that Jason should have just been a little more transparent about it. But at the end of the day, I'm not sitting over here just being like, you need to break up with him. That's a deal breaker. I can't believe he did that to you. I really don't see, again, beyond there should have been a need for better communication. There's nothing egregiously wrong with that action.
I tend to agree. I think, again, he was well within his rights, and he was very honest with her as soon as she brought it up. She was a little bit like petulant when she was talking to him about it. She couldn't just ask up front. She had to be like, so I hear you went to an event last night, a fundraiser, a benefit. And he's like, yeah, fibromyalgia, a very dull disease. Yeah. And he was just right there with answers for her when she asked about it. And he probably should have, just as a courtesy, said, look, I've got an event tonight. I'm obligated to bring a date, so I'm bringing a friend with me because I know you don't want your parents to know about us. And he was well within his rights to choose his own accompaniment for the evening. As we saw in Nagamati, it's like Emily makes the comment that they're low on men, and Lorelai says she is too. And so it's one of those things where like it really is that sort of heteronormative guy-gal date scenario that they're expected to fulfill. And so that's all he was thinking about. And they've only just started dating. I don't even know if they've defined the relationship yet. They are sleeping together, but then again, like, I don't know, if you ask me, just like, that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everybody. And, it is possible to have a physical relationship without that level of commitment. And without that definition, Jason's well within his rights to do whatever, ideally in Lorelai's full knowledge. But the other thing it brings up for me is the issue with Lorelai and Jason and the fact that he's in her parents' world. Because when we see them a few episodes later in Nag Hammadi and they're both at an engagement together, then, it starts to muddy the waters a little bit. And we see Lorelai in her parents' world as if she were to be Jason's date, officially out in the open. And we know that she doesn't like their world. And so it's sort of a window into the fact that if she were with Jason long term, she would kind of be obligated to go to this stuff a lot and to be that corporate wife, even if she maintains her independence and her own job and business and all of that kind of stuff. This would be a lot more of her future. Do you think she would have ultimately capitulated to that and been that woman for Jason had things gone differently for them?
Nope.
No?
Nope. I don't know how long it would have lasted. I can't say it would have gone on another week, another month, another year. But I think at some point, Lorelai would have just been like, this is exactly why, and it's not the only reason, but this is one of the reasons why I pieced out of my parents' house with a 1-year-old in the way that I did. Because I didn't want that life for myself anymore. I wanted to remove my daughter from it too and just have a different lifestyle. So I think as much as she cared for Jason and perhaps even loved him initially, I don't think there was enough care and enough love there that would have sustained that relationship long term and would have measured itself to be enough for Lorelai to be like, I will stay in this world that I don't want to be in and that I've always fought to escape from because I love you more than I dislike that. And that's where I think it lies.
Very well said. I agree with that. I don't know that they would have lasted long term. The chemistry was there, but the lifestyle differences were too stark, I think, in the end. But I guess that brings us to their breakup. And so I'm going to use this opportunity to pivot to the talk of Tick, 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 Boom. Because I think that's, first off, it's a phenomenal episode.
It's one of my favorites of all time throughout the show.
So good. But, we get the reveal from Floyd that he's had a PI on Jason. And he's the one who reveals their relationship to Emily and Richard. And they've been hiding this the whole time at Lorelai's insistence. And okay, first off, how do you feel about her, insistence that they not tell Emily and Richard?
She's well within her right to want to keep her relationship a little bit more closeted from her parents if that's what she chooses. It's not the first instance of Emily and Richard being critical of Lorelai's men. And I think, they would have looked on Jason a little bit more fondly because of his upbringing, because he is successful and doing well for himself. But I feel like it's always just the knee-jerk reaction of Lorelai to be like, I want my parents involved in my life as little as humanly possible. So if I can just have them not know about this for right now, because I just don't have the capacity or the energy to deal with it, or to have to be on the receiving end of Emily's chirping about it, I will just avoid that at all costs. Unfortunately, when it comes to a head, it does affect how Richard views Jason because he kept a secret. And we'll talk about that too, because I don't think it was right for Richard to take the relationship secret and equate it to Jason being distrustful within a business partnership. So I think those are two very different things that I have thoughts on. But I think Lorelai was well within her right to say, if you don't want to disclose this relationship to your parents just yet, that's her choice.
Yeah. They let it go on for 5 months, though. That's a really long time. And I get that it's complicated because he's in business with her dad and her mom's not super fond of him. But not telling them at all and actively keeping it a secret for that long, I could see how that would be a slap in the face to Emily and Richard just on a personal level, if not Richard and Jason's business interactions. Lorelai is so secretive about her life, and we see what happens when her parents get involved in stuff. It's not always pretty. But I also agree with you that I do think they would have seen him as an appropriate match for her. And so I think ultimately Emily might have come around and been like, okay, now I see why he was kind of being a suck up. But she probably would still have a little bit of that resentment for him, given how their interactions went in the previous months. So it's an interesting one. You're right. Lorelai is a grown-up. She's entitled to keep her relationships for herself if she must. But there were moments where I was just like, oh my God, Lorelai, like, why are you like this? She was just like too committed to the bit. Although I did like the line that she says, Jason's like, what if we slip up? And she's like, I never slip up. I'm completely non-slip. I'm like those mats in the shower or the bathtub, like it's true. She doesn't slip up. She's done this for so long that she knows what she's doing, but she didn't necessarily count on the fact that Floyd would have them tracked by a PI and that it would come out some other way and that it would end up being so much worse. That's the thing. Like, the secret makes it worse in the end for everyone. And so while I understand why she did it, ultimately the end result was hurt and betrayal felt by her parents. And, she's still working to keep this relationship peaceful and harmonious with them. Yeah. And so she does it in the name of that, but ends up jeopardizing it in the end. And not only that, but Emily and Richard's relationship starts to fall apart around that same time because all these other secrets start coming out of the woodwork. And I think this was like a nail in a coffin, seeing how Richard treated Jason with the business stuff, which brings me to another point that I want to move on to. There's, like, in Hobbit, Sofa, and Digger Stiles, Richard says the following line: what a wonderful world we live in, that the son of my enemy hates his father and then I benefit from it all. It's downright Elizabethan. And absolutely it is. It's very Shakespearean. The whole scenario does feel like something out of a production you would see at the Globe. But what do you think about Richard's motivation in going into business with Jason and the fact that, like, Richard, well, I guess this is leading the witness, but the fact that Richard was clearly only out for himself this whole time. He loved that Jason's motive was revenge, and then when the tides turned against him, he turned on Jason. Like, what's your take on that?
Corporate greed is corporate greed for a reason. It's, it doesn't surprise me because unfortunately the world is full of people like Richard Gilmore who would, backstab like that in a heartbeat just to make sure that at the end of the day their pockets are still padded. I will say from just a writing perspective and from a storyline perspective, it is highly, it's amusing to see Richard get lit up like a Christmas tree. To be like, ooh, you hate him, let's get him, and let's just use that to try and take Floyd down. But it doesn't surprise me. I hate that Jason, at the end of the day, just, ends up being the biggest loser throughout everything that follows. But it doesn't shock me that Richard did that, because that's just always the sort of savvy businessman that he has been. That's kind of the cold and sometimes lack of empathetic business person that you have to be within that world. Floyd's even worse. Yeah. Floyd's taking down his own son, his own flesh and blood. At least, with Richard, I don't think he would ever have done something like that with Lorelai. But it just speaks to me about how within that business world, sometimes, like, it's not even about the family name. It's just about money. And if I need to screw over someone to make sure I can, get my paycheck at the end of the day, I'll do it.
Yeah. So many people are like, oh, Richard's so great, I love Richard. And then I watch this and I'm like, wow. When you actually think about the levels of selfishness and greed and lack of concern for other people, including his business partner who helped him get to where he was, and also his daughter, like, he screwed a lot of people in that and went back to someone who screwed him. Like, just the levels of deceit and betrayal with the whole thing are pretty disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't love that about him. He was just so willing to throw everyone else under the bus so that he could come out ahead. And we will talk about this more when we get to law, because, you know, I think that Floyd's lawsuit was frivolous and Jason's actually had merit. And so we'll discuss those merits on the law in future. But the more pertinent character stuff that happens is Lorelai picking her father over Jason. Do you think it was just sort of her being like, well, this thing with Jason isn't built for the long haul anyway. Like, I've been having a good time, but, you know, this ultimately isn't for me. And now is as good a time to get out as any because everything's like screwed up now? Or do you really think that she had so much loyalty to her family that her choice truly was her father, who was being a royal jackass?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's the latter. I think at that point, she really did have loyalty to her father, even though it was going to cost her this relationship, cost her a potential future with a man. You know, I still stand by, you know, my earlier sentiment that I don't think that Lorelai and Jason were ever going to be endgame. But she didn't know that or think that necessarily in the moment fully. And I think she was just willing to immediately just cut ties 100% with Jason on behalf of her father and her loyalty and her dedication to him. And we see it over time and into the revival, how, you know, I think at the end of the day, for as much opposition and strife Lorelai always had with her parents, she did come to really love them and care for them as the years passed. So I really think this was stemming from loyalty to her father in that regard. And she makes it very clear. She's like, I can't be in a relationship with someone who was suing my father. Like, as much as I might care about you and love you, in her mind, I just think, like, I can't justify that. And I think that lack of justification comes from, in her mind, I need to remain loyal to my family right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I would tend to concur that it's not about the whole like, I want out thing. I think it is family loyalty. The question is whether that loyalty is misplaced in this moment, because I feel like if it were me, I would morally be standing with Jason.
Mm-hmm.
I would be like, I know you're my father, but I can't justify what you're doing. And, you know, I'm on his side on this. And so either you rectify this or, you know, I may need to cut ties with you because your behavior is completely abhorrent.
Mm-hmm. I agree that's probably something that she should have said, but she didn't. And I just think that it was just because at this point she had more care for her father than she did for Jason.
Yeah, I know she's had a complicated relationship with Richard, and she's had some great moments with him by this point. For as many difficult ones as they've had, they've also had some great ones. And, you know, he did just lose Trix not long before this as well. And she was really there for him when all that went down. But yeah, I guess maybe it's just a personal thing where I'm like, if it were me, I'd be with Jason on this one, because I'd be like, Dad, you're being an asshole. So like, just like do the right thing. I can't like accept or validate what you're doing because this is completely wrong. And, you know, whether he and I end up together is beyond the point. You're in the wrong here and you need to make it right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my thing. But let's back it up a little bit and talk about Emily and Jason. What do you think about Jason going ahead and booking the whole Atlantic City thing and then kind of coming in and telling Emily, like, oh, like, I don't think we should do a launch party. I think we should go to Atlantic City. We should give them something memorable. What do you think of that whole scene and that whole scenario from A Family Affair?
I think it's Jason just, again, being a little too self-centered and focused on what's going to put the most money into his pocket. And I think at the end of the day, if he's trying to acquire, maintain clients, I know the fun and best time that I can possibly give them. I think in Jason's mind, you know, that's, let's get hookers, let's go to Atlantic City, you know, let's let's show the, like, have a guys' night, show them all a good time. When in Emily's mind, she has always been raised and groomed to be that socialite wife who is the event planner, who is the organizer. So in her mind, what Jason is doing is wildly inappropriate, even if he thinks it's, for whatever reason, okay or acceptable. But I really hate what he did to Emily in that moment, because he knew that she was already in the process of planning an event, that she had something going. And so for him to just be like, nah, we're going to go do this instead. I can see how Emily would just be a little like, I don't love this. And the fact that you're now a direct business partner with my husband and you're making these choices that I don't deem to be inappropriate, I think that was always going to affect their relationship going forward. And not only how she viewed Jason as a business partner, but as a person, because he's not falling in line with what she wants or what she feels is appropriate. And that also tracks for me, because Emily can also very much be about, like, it's what I want and what I feel is appropriate. And my social event calendar supersedes what you think should be done in this regard.
Yeah, this is one where I disagree with you, because I don't think Jason knows that this is already so, like, he probably should know, but again, like, Emily just, like, kicks into party planning mode because that's what she's always done. She's been doing this for Richard for 36 years at this point. And, Jason's mom does the same thing, so he should have known better. But it's clear that Richard didn't really communicate this properly to Jason, and because he doesn't even get his guest list yet. And when Lorelai confronted him about it, he's like, I didn't know anything about the party, and like, I had already booked this. It's too late to change it. And I think Emily is just so used to this being her role for Richard. When he was within sort of like a bigger company and or as a sole proprietor, she had that kind of level of control with him and his social calendar with his business associates. But now that he has a partner, again, Jason is a Harvard-educated businessman who has been in this world and been kind of groomed by his father for years. He's educated. He knows what's happening. He has his finger on the pulse of business much better than Emily does. Her entire role in Richard's life is old-fashioned by this point. It's predicated on her sole purpose in life is to serve him and to ensure that he makes money so that he can support them both, right? And Jason came up in a business world that was much different than that. And he knows that memorable experiences and doing things differently is what's going to ultimately be the best for people. And I think that's still true to this day. And so at the end of the day, it's him and Richard whose names are on those business contracts. It's their business. Emily is used to being in a support role for Richard, but ultimately at the end of the day, Jason is a partner. They had just signed that paperwork. He is a partner. He has just as much right to make business decisions and to keep with the times and to do things on his own terms as anyone. And so just because this is the way it's always been done doesn't mean it has to continue that way. And so I don't agree with the whole hooker in the bed thing. And AC, Jersey Boardwalk is fun. Haven't been to AC yet, but I'm not much of a gambler. I don't know. I would have picked something different than that, but I see where he was coming from. And so I don't think it was his behavior so much. Richard was a little complicit in it because, again, the communication just wasn't there. Richard's not good at that. He always relies on other people to do it for him, like his secretary and or Emily. And so he came up a little short there. And I think that it's really just Emily, once again, contending with the fact that without Richard, she feels obsolete. We see her dealing with that again in season 7 and after he passes in the revival. Yeah. So that's something that she has to deal with herself. I don't think Jason's responsible for it. It's just in reaction to the realization that without this, she has nothing else. And that's sad. And I feel sad for her that she has to feel that way. But that's why feminism exists and why women have fought all of these decades and probably hundreds of years for the right to pursue fulfillment and happiness on their own terms. And so when your whole vocation in life is tied to your partner, that can feel unfulfilling when suddenly something has to change and you can't pivot with the rest of the world. And so I feel bad for her, but it's not Jason's fault. But that brings me to at least my last point that I want to talk about. You may have other things. But speaking of Richard passing in the revival, what do you think of Jason's brief appearance at his funeral, his wake?
I thought it was touching. I think I would have expected to see him there, all of the years of business strife aside and how everything played out and went down. He was a significant part of Lorelai's life for the time that he was in it. As much as Emily might not have liked him in those moments, they did have, history that went, even beyond that and backtracked for years before any of that went down too. So I think it was appropriate for him to be there. I think he did need to make that appearance. Personally, I did love seeing Chris as the actor just come back, and because I love any moment from the revival when we get, those characters showing up. So it was wonderful to see him. And I think it was just kind of putting a bow tie on, the end of their relationship that they never really got to flourish out before, where they're just it ended so abruptly and so harshly that even though I think at this point we know that we probably were not right for each other and it might not have lasted, we never got closure with it. So at least now we're having some semblance of that.
I mean, in a way, it's been so long that the relationship stuff doesn't even really come up. You're right. It's lovely to see Chris back. I think anytime we got one of those nostalgia appearances in the show was just kind of a pleasure. I really wish we'd had one from Max Medina. I think he would have been the better one. I think he should have been at the Chilton stuff in spring. That would have been perfection. Why, Amy? Tell me why. Yeah, he wasn't super useful. But it was nice to see them sort of interacting again after all this time. You're right. He did sort of just fall off the face of the earth a little bit because, he shows up at the inn, and then Suki kind of, I can't remember whether she colludes with Michelle on this one, but they pretend his apartment's on fire to get him out of the inn, get him out of the way. But I think that was one of the things I loved about him too, was he was so persistent with Lorelai. He asked her out almost immediately, and then he kept sending her flowers and chocolates, and he called and he asked her out several times. He's like, I really like you, and I'm just going to keep trying. Eventually I'll hit my pathetic threshold, but not yet. Please go out to dinner with me. And he doesn't give up on it easily at the end either. For all of the other guys we've seen for Lorelai, Max slinks off with his tail between his legs, I guess.
Yep.
Alex drops off the face of the planet. We never get any idea what happens there. Jason really fights for her. Luke even holds secrets back from her and lets her go and lets his anger get the better of him when he finds out about the Christopher stuff. And it takes him a long time to get back on board and let go of all of that. And so to see Jason actually fight for her and her to just be like, no, I'm done. I'm out. We broke up. Get away from me. It is a little unfortunate for her to give up on a good relationship. Again, just the circumstances are annoying to me because, like I said, her dad was totally in the wrong. And I really feel for Jason in that moment to have his entire professional reputation bombed overnight and her father be responsible for it. Wow. And then she dumps him. That's a rough week for Jason. Poor guy. But yeah, as to his appearance in the revival, I would take any returning actor that I could get. So even that brief cameo was a lot of fun. He wasn't the most impactful on the story, but I do find it sweet that even after all these years and everything that went down, I mean, maybe that means that their lawsuit was settled relatively amicably in some sort of mediation, arbitration, settlement, and he kind of was able to regain his professional reputation a little bit despite Richard and Floyd's attempts to completely drown him. So hopefully Digger's living his best life somewhere in Connecticut, and yeah, it's good to see him again.
Yeah. I agree. And that's all I can say is that I hope that Jason is happy, as I hope anyone that our women don't end up with are happy in their own lives, and that they just, find their people, find your person, and just live your best life. And it seems like, at least from what we get, that Jason is doing that.
Let's hope so. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Jason right now?
No, I think we've pretty much, summed him up. I'm sure he'll come up again in future episodes because we always circle back on things.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good way to close him out for this one.
Yeah, I agree.
That being said, what's coming up next for us?
This is going to be a fun one. Later in the season, we're going to talk a lot about Luke and Lorelai. But first, we're going to revisit his other relationships. We're going to talk about Rachel and Nicole and probably Anna. So
spicy stuff.
Yeah, Luke has a really big growth arc in season 4, and so there's going to be a lot of focus on him coming up in our next couple episodes. He's our end of season character study this time around, and we're going to talk about him and Lorelai for an entire episode, because that run of episodes at the end of season 4 is just like everything that builds up to the one true pairing of the show, at least according to Amy. Like, I still have my qualms with them as a couple, but we'll get there eventually. But yeah, so come tune in next week to have us give you a retrospective on Rachel, Nicole, Anna, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Not a ton of girlfriends.
We have thoughts.
We have many
thoughts. While you're waiting for that episode to drop, please go back and watch some of our old videos. If you want more GG content while we continue to keep our fingers crossed and wait for Revival 2.0, that's really all we can do at this point, other than just beg and continue to offer sacrifices to the 2.0 overlords. And Amy, if you're listening, and I know you are, give it to us now. Thank you. But go back and watch some of our old videos, and please share those videos with anyone in your life who's another GG fan if they're just itching for more content like we always are. And please just remember to always do those YouTube-y things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, again, share our content with your friends if and when you're able to. It always does help us out, and we're just really grateful for all of the support that we continue to get.
We really are.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. On that note,
enjoy your weekend, folks.
Yes. Cheers to the weekend. Cheers to it, full on being pumpkin spice season. Halloween's coming up in a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm. It's rewatch season, folks.
We are deep.
We have made it. Get on it. Just go back and dive deep into the GG world, and
deep into rewatch season. But that being said, we will see you next Friday night for dinner.
Bye.
Bye.